Today's Supporting Leaders episode is with Terry Lee, and Terry Lee talks to us about the W.I.N method. The W.I.N method is a method that Terry has crafted. He talks us through what it is, how it was developed. It's fascinating, lots of great stuff in there. Also, look for the show notes because I'm going to put in Terry's website and how to get in touch with him. We also talk about emergenetics. That's a new concept for you. You'll definitely want to hear more about this and how that can really strengthen your relationships with other people. There's so much more in the episode, but I do want to share with you just one more thing that really struck me in this episode. But we talk about managing emotions from the right frame. Lots of great stuff in there. So take a listen. Before I get you into the show, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Terry. Terry L. Lee is a trainer, speaker, and a W.I.N guide. His mission in life is to help people identify their potential and possibilities and navigate their progress to success. Terry has 20 years of experience in training, learning, and development, leadership development, workshop facilitation, and public speaking. He's worked with thousands of leaders on helping them become more self-aware and leadership ready. Terry holds a master's degree in leadership communication from Bellevue University and an executive coaching certification from Kaplan University. He also holds his certification in Emergenetics and EQ-1 2.0 emotional intelligence. Enjoy the show. But Terry, I am so excited to have you on the show and tap into your brain and a little bit more about what you're doing with leadership. So thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. It's exciting.
So Terry, share with us a little bit about your background, some of your professional experiences, and how you came to be where you're at now.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go way back to actually early 2000s, actually probably the year 2000. And I had a position as a business analyst. And if you knew me, you knew how my mind worked, and you say business analyst, that doesn't seem to fit your personality. But it was a job, and it was just one of those jobs where I was decent at it. But then I had a manager. His name is W.I.N, and he provided me the opportunity to train. And I hadn't been a business analyst that long. And whenever we rolled out, we were getting ready to roll out a new program, a new system. And he thought it would be a good idea that I train the rollout to the users because I had the least investment in the project as a whole because I was new. And he said, everybody else in this project is kind of married to a process in this system. And I need somebody that is not, solely tied to one process, but can understand the whole system and speak to users in their language. And then he goes, you can think about it. You don't have to give me an answer today. Just let me know in a week or so. And I ended up saying yes. And just by me saying yes, actually really positioned me to, have a great career in training and leadership development. Because as I reflect back on it, I could have said no, and maybe I would have got another opportunity to get into leadership and training, but maybe not. So just having that opportunity, I'm grateful for it. So, I delivered that training. And then what happened after that is our VP of IT, he went and got certified in 7 Habits, and he was going to deliver that to the whole IT department. So he went and got certified, came back and delivered it one time, and realized he didn't like training. So he had sat in on my training and said, hey, we have another seat for another certification. Would you like to go get certified and deliver 7 Habits to the rest of the IT department? And I'm like, yeah. So I went and got certified, came back and delivered that. And then one thing led to another. I ended up in HR, and about 18 years, that's about 18 years ago, I am now in leadership development, and have had several experiences in training and leadership development that have gotten me here. So that's kind of how I got started in that. It was just a matter of me saying yes to an opportunity that I had no idea what was going to happen on the other side.
What a cool story. I was thinking that the whole time, like what a neat story that highlights what happens when you say yes to things. And you have your podcast, Lead from the W.I.N side. And we talked briefly over email about how that came to be. Talk a little bit about how this W.I.N method developed for you.
Okay. And it's actually pretty funny. So I don't even know where the opportunity came from. I think it was when I was working in HR one year, and they had extra tickets to best places. We had an award called Best Place to Work, and we have it in Omaha, but I think it's also a national program. So because it was the HR, the extra ticket, I was like, sure, I'll go. And the first time I went, I just listened to the stories of the companies that were winning this award. And then, I just as somebody in the audience, I listened. Then I got the opportunity to go again the following year. And I was like, a couple of companies that had won the year before. And then I started looking at the list of companies that had won. And it was always consistently, 4 or 5 companies that would either win or be in the top 5. So as I listened that second year, I started noticing a trend in the presentations most of the time it was either the owner or the CEO that was telling the story. And then the third year I went, I said, I'm gonna really listen intentionally to see what all these companies have in common, as opposed to what other companies don't have in common. And as I took notes, and I intentionally took notes the third year I went, and what actually came out of my notes were, and this is where the win came from. What came out of my notes were these leaders actually knew who they were, what they wanted to build, and who it would take to build that organization. So from that WIN perspective and the acronym, the W is really about, who are you and what do you want and who do you need, and being very clear on that. And then the other thing that emerged was they were very inspiring. And the reason they were inspiring is because they were authentic, because they were true. And the people that worked for them, it wasn't something that was, for them, it wasn't a job. It was a family. It was a community that they worked for. And some people that I knew that worked for some of those companies, maybe they left those companies, but they still told stories about those companies that they worked for. And then the N stood for nurture, because, as I told you, some of those people talked about companies, even if they left and it was the best place to work, they always talked about and had stories about how the leaders took care of one another. So that win, it sat in my head for a long time. I had it in the notes, and it sat on my desk. Those notes sat on my desk for probably a year or two. And then I started looking at leadership development classes I was leading. And I went back to my notes and I was like, I need to use this. I need to use this as kind of a guidepost to help develop leadership. Because when I initially got into leadership development and training, and even when I went to school for my master's degree in leadership communication, you always learn about the theories, right? Mm-hmm. And while I was in some of those classes, working in leadership development and then being in a class, you can say, now I understand this theory. Yeah, I've seen this happen. So that's what you call that, right? But when I went back to my notes and I said, okay, here's how I can take my training to another level and really help people, is to help them win. So it was kind of a way for me to personalize it, and a way for me to help me be authentic as a trainer. Because even as I think about, some of my early days of training and some of the things that the way I said them and the way I presented them, today I was like, I can't believe I said that or presented right. that. And then think about as an evolution, and being able to put it in a framework that I think helps people. I always say win, and win is not about the scoreboard. Win is about understanding who you are, and then also helping your team win. And when I started incorporating that, I just sprinkled it in every now and then I would use it when I got into coaching leaders. I started using it in a coaching framework. Then I started using it in a teamwork framework. So when I presented or talked to teams and did team building interventions or team interactions, I would use that framework as well. So that's where it came from. But then there's some other stories that kind of go into that I think are important as well. And one of them is I spoke for a company called Making It Count. And we spoke to high school and college kids on making the best decisions when it came to education and career. And when I reflect on that training and speaking to them, it was also kind of the same formula. How do we present a formula that help these youth win when it comes to education and when it comes to professionalism and building a career? And a lot of the framework around those presentations, it still had the same thing. Who are you? What kind of student are you? What are the skills that you can leverage? And then how do you nurture those skills and grow as you grow and get older? So I was beginning to see that trend in a lot of the other things that I was involved with. So I said, I just got to use this all the time now.
Yeah, I just love that story because again, it's like you said yes to going to this thing that they had tickets for, and then you're sitting there in the audience, and I think people could either walk away discouraged or they could walk away inspired, but then just put it in their back pocket forever. And to sit there and take notes and really be engaged in what you were in has led to, it's fascinating. So, one of the first components of this, your W.I.N method seems to be this self-awareness. And so, what would you say to the leader who's like, I just don't have time for that. I'm managing, all of these people. We have these organization mission and goals that we need to hit. Like, I don't have time to take a look into who I am. What does that matter?
And whenever I hear that question, the first thing I ask is, so why did you get into leadership? And a lot of times the question is they can't answer it, because a lot of times what happens is when people get into leadership, it's a promotion or it's an assignment, and they may have wanted to lead, but only to lead in a sense of this promotion provides me more money, more perks, more opportunity, and they don't really think about the people. So when I ask that question and I don't get an answer right away, and I was like, I want you to really think about why you got into leadership. And usually the first thing they get into is they were good at what they do or what they did before they got into the leadership role. And then generally what happens is they're so comfortable with doing that, they continue to do that, right? Because that's what they know.
Yeah.
And then what happens is they don't have time. That's why they don't have time, because you spend so much time focusing on what you're good at and what you're comfortable with, that other piece of leadership is leading people to do what you used to do. So now your role has changed. So I always challenge them to say, go back and think about why you're good at what you're good at. And then think about how you can make the people you lead good at what you're good at, but in their fashion. And I think that resonates with people who really want to get good at leadership. And it doesn't resonate with people who really just want the leadership for the title. So I always challenge people that say they don't have time. Most of the time they don't have time is because you're stuck in this mode of, I'm only going to do what I'm good at, as opposed to deal with all this people stuff. This people stuff will take care of itself in the end, but it really doesn't, because you're in charge of that. And when they can hear and understand that message, they begin to make those kinds of shifts. And then people really get to understand, do you really want to be in a leadership role? And when they do that, they start to make those shifts. And something I heard early on in training is always work with the willing. And I think that's important, especially in coaching and leadership, is you work with the people who are willing to develop themselves. And everybody's not willing all at the same time. So sometimes you have to be, as a coach and a trainer, you have to be willing to wait.
Right. Well, that's a great reflective question, though. Why did you get into leadership? So I want to take that a little bit further. You had an episode with Kelvin, I believe, was it Kelvin Reed that you had on your show?
Kevin
Yes.
Red. Yep.
So you guys talked about emergenetics. It was a fantastic episode. So I would encourage people to go find your podcast, Lead from the W.I.N Side. But tell listeners, what is emergenetics? What does that mean? And how did you get into that work?
All right. So Emergenetics, it's a psychometric tool that measures four thinking preferences and 3 behavioral preferences. And how I actually got into it one of the companies that I worked for, that was the founder. Actually, let me go back. The founder of Emergenetics is from Omaha.
Oh.
And the company that I was working for, did a lot of work with another organization that she founded. So Dr. Gail Browning, who was a teacher, an educator, by the way, and she, as an educator, what she recognized in kids, I think she taught first and second grade. And she recognized that, okay, so we have this teaching structure that we present, that we're trying to fit these kids into the structure. But she noticed there was a disconnect because, okay, we have the structure, but this structure doesn't resonate with every child that I'm teaching. So she realized that it wasn't about how smart a kid was. It was about how are they smart. So she moved from teaching and got into personality types and how people learn. And she ended up developing, with some other partners, Emergenetics. And so Emergenetics and the definition of Emergenetics is how our genetics and life experience emerge. So that emergence from genetics, but also emergence from experience. And it starts with 4 thinking preferences. The 2 on the left side are analytical and structural. And then the 2 on the right are conceptual and social. So it has this, if you think of a model of a brain, an original brain science was, you had a left brain and a right brain. But in her research, it was, so we do have a left brain and right brain, but they don't work separately, they work together. And we all have a preference on how we begin to process our thought, how we begin to solve problems, how we begin to relate to people. And we have a preference on where it starts. And it usually starts in one of those areas, where it's analytical, structural, conceptual, or social. And the challenge is understanding, where does it start for you? And then the next challenge is, for the people that I work with, where does it start for them? And then being able to balance that and work together as a team, as opposed to forcing my preference on this person, especially as a leader, or that other person trying to force their preference on me. And then you have the 3 behavioral styles. And there's numerous behaviors, but their research shows that your ability, your expressiveness, your assertiveness, and your flexibility really show up first. So in that model, your behaviors show up first, because that's what people see. People see your behaviors first. They can't see what you're thinking first until you do an action, till you speak, or till you do an action. So those behaviors are expressiveness. All the behaviors are broken up into thirds. So like expressiveness is first third, second third, third third, and same with assertiveness and flexibility. So when you're on the first third spectrum of expressiveness, it doesn't mean that you're not expressive. It just means you express yourself in a slower pace. Where, for example, if we were having a conversation, I'm not going to express my thoughts of what you're saying till I hear everything that you say. Whereas somebody that's on the third end of that, I can express my thoughts of what you're saying and still think about what you're saying at the same time. So it's more of a thinking and talking at the same time. And then from an assertive side, somebody that's first third assertive doesn't mean that they're not assertive. It just means they also assert themselves at a slower pace, as opposed to a third assertive who asserts themselves with high energy. And that's the pace that you communicate and do your work. And then flexibility, first third doesn't mean you're not flexible. It just means I need more information before I change my mind, before I consider it. And then third is I'll consider it, and I'm more open to changing. So just like the thinking styles, it's important to know where you fall. But it's also important to know, especially if you're a leader or if you work on a team, where your other people fall. Because if people don't understand it, they fill in the gaps for themselves, right? But if you seek to understand, say, hey, I think this way, and here's how I process. How did you get to that same, or how did you come to that conclusion? And asking those questions, that's kind of where you meet in the middle, and that's kind of where those relationships emerge. So the reason I like the tool is it's a simple tool that gives you an idea of how you might think, but then it goes into how others might think. So how do you merge the two to become a collective?
You're trained in emergenetics, and so let's say somebody's leading and they're trained in emergenetics. Do they need to have everybody in their organization go through it as well to be able to start to recognize these patterns and behaviors? Or as a leader who's trained in it, can you just start identifying it on your own?
I think, in an ideal world, and this doesn't, in corporate America, it doesn't happen. You can't get everybody trained. But I think from a leader perspective, and when I coach it, I think it's important, especially if you're in a leadership role or role of influence, is to, once you understand yourself and how your mind works, then you become more open to how others' minds work. So you don't necessarily have to have everybody trained in it, but if you can model and recognize and say, hey, here's how my mind works. Let's open up this room and have a conversation so we can all see how everybody else's mind work. You can model that, I think, from a leadership seat. And then once you model it, people begin to pick it up. Because as you model it, you start to use the language, you start to use those behaviors. And then it reminds me of the law of the harvest. So you start to sow those seeds, and then your team begins to harvest those things where they say, hey, this team is open. I respect and honor, how you think, and you respect and honor how I think, and we can have those healthy conflicts and those healthy conversations to solve a problem. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, ideally, if you can get the whole organization, yes, but it's not necessary if the leader is willing to model that, and then be open to have the team use those skills as well.
Yeah. I want to ask you about something that you just mentioned. You talked about healthy conflict. And I think sometimes in organizations, we avoid it. I mean, I think it's totally natural for people to feel like, I don't like conflict. It makes me uncomfortable. But I want to dig into that because it caught me when you said healthy conflict. So what's healthy conflict, and how can leaders, encourage, or what are some of the look fors if a conflict is healthy?
Okay, so I'll give you a quick story to start that. So, and it kind of involves emergenetics. This was pre me knowing emergenetics. So I worked with somebody. We were in charge of engagement surveys and presenting engagement surveys, the results, and then presenting out action plans for the engagement surveys. We're completely opposite personalities, where I'm more kind of reserved and laid back, where she's more of, I talked about assertive on Emergenetics, she's more assertive, like 100% go, thinking, talking at the same time. So when we were assigned to the project and they told me who I was working with, at first I was immediately like, oh God, I don't want to work with her. And that was my mindset going in. I don't know what hers was at the time. So as we began to work on the project, as she started, over talking and always talking, I would get more and more reserved, and almost to the point where I would intentionally miss meetings or say I'm not available for a meeting just because I knew she was going to be there. And then we took our whole team, our HR team actually took Emergenetics. This was before I got certified, and I looked at mine, and I kind of knew, I knew I was more laid back, second, third expressive, which meant it depends on the topic. But when it came to working with somebody that was very assertive, I would have a tendency to withdraw. So I looked at that, and then I started laughing because I was like, this is happening to me right now. So then I went into her office and I said, let me see your Emergenetics profile. And it actually said what I thought it would say. So then I started to tell some of the things I just told you about. Sometimes I feel like you overtalk me, and I feel like I need to withdraw. And it's like I can't think when you're talking. And she started laughing, and she goes, I never intended to do that. That's just the way I am. And then we end up both laughing. And at the end of the conversation, we said we need to leverage both of our personalities, and then we can, there's no telling what we can do. And then after that, we ended up being, good friends, and we always worked with each other. She still works at the organization. I don't. I still communicate with her. So going from that, where I didn't want to work with her, to understanding, all from just understanding the personality style, because sometimes we fill in that blank because we say, well, they're not like me, so I don't like that. So that's that unhealthy conflict. And usually unhealthy conflict is undealt with conflict, where you flight it. And healthy conflict is that assertiveness to say, how can we solve the problem? Because I think the conflict has a negative connotation. When you hear the word conflict, you automatically think it's something bad. But it's really just it's a differing of opinions. It's a differing of perspective. It's a differing approach to things. And if you don't approach it and understand the other side, it's an unhealthy conflict, because it stays unresolved. Whereas a healthy conflict is, here's how I think, here's how you think, how can we come together? Yeah. We may never agree, but we can talk about it. And I still understand where you're coming from, where I'm coming from, and we can have a healthy conversation. And then you kind of have that, that push and pull, where you say, hey, I need your personality here, or that person says, hey, I need your personality style here. And you have that give and take, as opposed to that stance where I'm not coming to your side and you're not coming to my side.
Yeah, I think that was a really powerful story that you just shared, because I think a lot of times too, it's like, well, go and tell that person how you feel. And I think people can play it in their minds of how threatening that would be. But like that story that you shared of like, you guys are like laughing about it, that like there's a way to approach sharing with somebody how they've made you feel, that doesn't have to be threatening, and that can be productive. And I really like what you just said there about like it's unhealthy when you don't address it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, one of the last areas I want to connect with you on is about emotional intelligence. I know you've done a lot of work in this area too. So, for those who that might be kind of a newer term for them, like, well, what is emotional intelligence?
So emotional intelligence, so when you think about IQ, right? IQ, and I said this in one of the podcasts, IQ is your ability to know stuff, right? Your ability to understand it and learn stuff, whether it's math, whether it's reading, you can pick it up and learn stuff. So emotional intelligence is understanding your emotional stuff and other people's emotional stuff. So you have, you can never eliminate emotions out of a situation. You have to understand where that emotion is coming from for yourself. And then you understand where that emotion is coming from someone else. So that emotional intelligence is, you have the self-awareness, but then you also have the social awareness side. And then you have how you manage yourself. So that's the self-management side. And then how you manage the social awareness side, the social management side of other people's emotions. So it kind of goes back to same principle with Emergenetics. Once you can understand how your emotions work and where they come from, it opens up space for you to understand the emotions and actions and reactions of other people. But you have to be willing to do that. So that's kind of my definition. I think it's just paying attention. So if you pay attention, and when I really got into emotional intelligence, I recognized I wasn't paying attention to feelings. I would just, if it was something strong, I would just let it happen. If it was something I wanted to avoid, I would just avoid it. And then as I started studying it more, I started recognizing, okay, this emotion is fear. But where is the fear coming from? And usually it was related to fear of harming the relationship, or fear of harming maybe something that what people might think of me. Well, then I would say, well, where did that come from? And most of the time, it's usually not associated with what caused that emotion. You got to kind of go back to say, where is this coming from? And then you manage it from there. So it takes a lot of self-reflection to manage emotions and recognize where they're coming from and what might be causing them. And then once you can do that on a regular basis, and one of the things that I do is I write it down. So I'm having this emotion, I write it down. Where does it come from? And I actually got this from my wife because I didn't used to always express my emotions, and she always writes things down. So she said, write them down. And once I started writing them down, you start to see what you think is anger is not really anger. It's annoyance. And there's a huge difference between anger and annoyance. But if you think it's anger, your reaction to that is stronger. Whereas annoyance is just where you might be disappointed in a small thing. And if you try to manage that emotion from the wrong perspective, the wrong frame, you can't manage the emotion because you're managing the wrong emotion. So as you write down certain emotions you have and look at them and say, where is this coming from? And then ask, how strong is this emotion? Is it strong or is it light? Then you can know how much you have to work on it to deal with it, right? So I think that's how you manage it from the self side. And then when you look at other people, is you almost have to have to silence your mind to say, what might this person be thinking? So then it requires asking other questions. What did you think when I thought that? Or I noticed you sat up in your seat, or I noticed that your tone of voice raised when I said this. Can you tell me what was happening? And then as you do that for yourself and other people, you start to build up that emotional intelligence for yourself and others. But it does take intentional exercise and intentional action to do that.
That's so thought-provoking because it's like, I think most people probably heard the term emotional intelligence, but to hear you explain it and talk about like the real application of that, it's just making my mind really think, because I think, whether you're a male or whether you go into leadership or if it's just work in general, I think that there's so many messages of like shutting down the emotion. And, that really kind of like turns it on its head of like, no, lean into it. Like that's going to help you in the long run.
Yeah. And, it's funny you said that. So earlier I talked about as I reflect on some of the things that I said early on when I was in the training, something that somebody told me in the organization as it came to emotions was we need our managers to check their emotions at the door because they can't be productive. And I as I thought about that, I actually said that in a class, and I almost want to just hit myself in the head for saying that, because like you said, there's no way people can leave what's happening at the door. You've got to bring your full self to work. And then as a leader or just as a member of a team, allow space for people, like you said, to lean into what's happening. And a perfect example of that, the work from home situation, the organizations that are successful now they have an inside view of what's going on with people wholly, not just when they come to work. And the successful organizations have been able to lean into the emotions and the stresses of working from home, dealing with COVID and dealing with all the other things that came along with COVID. So as you do research and look at organizations that have been able to thrive and be successful, and I'm talking about large organizations, not the smaller ones that, because customers couldn't come there, those organizations were able to lean into those and create that psychologically safe environment to where people can bring their whole self to the screen as opposed to the office now.
Yeah, great point, because while the pandemic has been difficult and, frustrating for people, but there's also so many opportunities it's provided, and it's like peeled back that curtain, right? And so you can use your knowledge for good in an organization. Well, Terry, it has been nothing but a pleasure to talk with you a little bit more about, things that we're both passionate about. And so, if anybody is interested in, further leadership development or learning more about the W.I.N method, what's the best way for them to reach out to you or find more information?
Well, you can find me at tlspeaks.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, this Terry Lee. Actually, it should say Terry L. Lee on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at T Lee Speaks. And then, that's pretty much it. Or you can email me at terrylee@tlspeaks.com.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in the show notes too, so people know how to connect with you. But Terry, I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your afternoon to be on the show. It was a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Lisa.
Thanks for listening to the Supporting Leaders podcast. For more on supporting leaders, go to www.supportingleaders.org. Here you'll find links to the YouTube versions of our interviews and links to the podcast. You'll also find articles on leadership. To join in on the conversation, find the Supporting Leaders group on Facebook and find us on Instagram at Supporting Leaders.